Hi dear friends, I'm Isabella and welcome to my channel. This month in May, I read a total of 8 books and I'm currently on my 9th one, which is pretty intense, which is pretty crazy because literally I read 4 books last year. Like the entire year I read a total of 4 books, and in this past month I managed to read 8. The human mind, the human brain, incredible. And I don't really know what came over me this month. I think I just had this like huge itch just to read, and I just kept going. And now I feel like I'm myself again. I feel like I'm back in high school or back in 8th grade where I just lied on my bed and read for 10 hours a day. That's me right now. Anyway, the great thing of no longer being 13 and actually being someone in their 20s with a literature degree now is that I definitely expanded my taste. And I have so many more recommendations, and I would like to share them with you because I actually liked all the books and all the media I consumed this month. I haven't watched a whole lot of movies, but I have read a lot of things. I want to start off by talking about the absolute stars of the show, and I'm calling them the stars of the show because they came out of absolutely nowhere and they blew my mind, and I gave them 5 stars. And that is The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey and Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. These are also both library books, and that's what I meant, like they were just so random. I didn't even have them, I just came across them and I love them. My god, was this book so good. So Kaikeyi is actually based off of a character from the Hindu epic, the Ramayana, and in this epic she is actually the princess of a kingdom called Kakaya, and then she is married off. She's actually the 3rd wife to a very, very powerful king, and the king's name is Dasharath, by the way. While she was one of the queens of this kingdom, she was actually very, very influential, and as a woman in the society it's very difficult to be that influential, so she had a lot of power for being in the position that she was in. In the original epic she becomes villainized because she's thought to be the reason that the rightful heir, Prince Rama, was exiled from his position in the palace. And so this is a fictional retelling of her story. It's a feminist retelling of her story, and I absolutely loved it. I actually don't really know much about the original epic though, to be honest. I learned most about what it was through this book. This main character, she is an absolute badass. She is so cool. In the kingdom that she was born in, she was the only girl, and she was also one of the eldest. She's the eldest daughter, and she has a twin brother. And because she's the only girl, she was kind of considered like a burden by her father because it's again a very misogynistic society. He didn't really know what to do with her, and so she was basically neglected by her father. And then also as a child her mother gets exiled, and so she's kind of abandoned by both parents, and she's also dubbed as God Forsaken, which means that even the gods don't really influence her that much. Like they don't really have a whole lot of power over her. So in general she's just very much like, well, I'm in this by myself, I guess. This book is written with so much complexity and so much intention that you can feel exactly what the author was trying to convey, and you absolutely fall in love with this main character and you understand where she's coming from. Like I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs, and that's what this book was, and I supported her all the way through. Like I understand where she's coming from completely. And also I've heard this book being compared to Madeline Miller's Circe. I haven't read Circe, but I have read The Song of Achilles, and if it's anything like The Song of Achilles then I'm sure it's amazing. But I'm pretty sure Circe is also a feminist retelling of an old myth, and man, I love feminist retellings, so this is a great, great read. And now I'll talk about The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey, who by the way has a very, very sick name. Her name's Eowyn, like the character from Lord of the Rings. So The Snow Child is about an older couple who moved to Alaska while still grieving the death of their stillborn child that they had many, many years ago. And it's something that had left a void in their relationship and within themselves, and so they move away trying to start a new life because they just want to feel like partners again. They just want to feel that joy again. And so one day in the first snowfall they decide to lighten up and they have a snowball fight, and they create this snowman which ends up looking more like a snow child, and they like give her a face and they put mittens on her. And then the very next day they realize that the snowman is gone and so are the mittens. And at first they're like, well, did some kids take them with the animals? Like, what was this? But all they see are some footsteps trailing away from the snowman, not coming towards the snowman, trailing away from it. And they're like, well, that's kind of suspicious. And then over the next few weeks and months during the winter time, they just see this girl in the woods smiling at them, playing with them. She seems like she's kind of shy, but we have no idea where she comes from. And they're like, well, is she a human or is she a snow spirit? What is she? We don't know. I saw a YouTube comment of someone talking about how this is a really incredible book and something that just really stayed with them for a long time, and that was enough promo for me. I'm like, well, I'm definitely gonna read this book, and they were right. This is something that is definitely gonna stick with me for a very long time. The prose was absolutely stunning. It is so beautiful to read. Eowyn Ivey is a wonderful writer in that sense, and it's a very moving and emotional tale. So, great read. Next, I'd like to talk about some books that I was absolutely obsessed with in high school, and now I did a reread of them. And the first one that I want to talk about is A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. Now this is a play, and I had to read this for my grade 12 English class, and I was just so intrigued by it. It's about a woman named Blanche, and she's 30 years old, and she takes a streetcar named Desire and gets off at the Elysian Fields to go visit her younger sister and her husband, Stella and Stanley, and they live in New Orleans, by the way. And so Blanche moves in with them because, well, basically, like, their family had a plantation and somehow they lost all the money for that plantation, and then Blanche also ended up getting fired from her job as a high school teacher, so she basically has no money and she needs a place to stay, and that's why she's staying with Stella and Stanley. Stanley is a brute of a man, a very horrible, violent person who Stella is in love with and obsessed with. And then Blanche is also a very interesting character because she is absolutely obsessed with aging. Like, she can't let people look at her in the light. Like, she only wants to talk to people when it's dark. She always wants to cover herself up, but at the same time she's always searching for validation of her beauty, especially from men, even if it means crossing moral boundaries. Like, for example, she flirts with her sister's husband and with the teenage boys that deliver her mail, and it's like, it's very weird and interesting, and these characters in this play are just so polarizing, and it's just one very intense story compacted into this tiny little book, and I am obsessed with it. God damn, it's so good. And Tennessee Williams, the playwright, he has this whole section at the end here where he just interviews himself, and I'm like, he's just like me for real, like, just talking to himself about all his ideas. Like, that's what I do. It was such a fun time rereading this again, and there's still so many things about this book that I don't understand in terms of themes and in terms of like why the characters do what they do, and that is a good story to me. I also reread Six of Crows. I read this book when I was 16, and all the characters in the book were also 16, and at the time I was like, whoa, like, they're my age and they're doing all these like really cool things. And now that I'm so much more older than them, I look back fondly at them as if they were my old friends, and they're still getting up to their no good shenanigans. But this is a really well-written YA novel, and what I didn't know when I first read this was that this is a spin-off of the original Grishaverse trilogy, like the whole Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. I wasn't a huge fan of the original trilogy, but this is one of the best and well-written books in terms of YA that I've read. Like, this is an easy 5 stars. It's about a group of 6 teenagers, and they're all a part of this gang, and they're a part of this heist to kidnap the scientist who's making this drug that can basically turn the magical beings of this universe into like super soldiers. They're trying to stop this drug from hitting the worldwide market so that politicians can't create this whole army and use them for their own purposes and stuff, except they're not doing it out of the goodness of their own hearts. They're doing it because they want money. I like that a lot of them are actually very morally bankrupt, and I love morally bankrupt characters, and I'm so glad to reread it, and it's just so witty and it's just so funny. I also reread The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, which I was also obsessed with in high school. It's about this girl named Blue. She comes from a family of psychics and mediums, and she's been told that if she kisses her true love, he will die. And then she meets this group of boys from this private school nearby, which obviously complicates things because she's like, well, I don't want to fall in love, but then she likes these boys that she's talking to. And then there's like this whole other like magical storyline, which is that these boys are also on the hunt for this sleeping Welsh king that would grant them a great big wish if they were to find him and wake them up, and so they need her magical powers, they need her help to help them find this great king. And I love it because it's like this like quiet little fantasy. It's like this, like, it's not super intense or anything, it's just like magical realism in a way where it's like there's magic existing in the ordinary, and I love books that are like that. It got me a while to get used to this writing style because I think it's very descriptive, but I grew to appreciate it a lot. So yes, also a very, very good book. Now that I'm done the books I read from high school, I'd like to talk about Fleabag, which had me in a chokehold throughout university. I love this show. I love the show starring Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I think it's just one of the best shows that's ever been written, and I'm obsessed with it. And I got Fleabag, which is just the original play that the entire show is based off of, and this play is also written and stars Phoebe Waller-Bridge. This book actually features interviews about how Fleabag was constructed and how it was produced as a theater show before it came onto the big screen. And it's so nice to hear about the insight, like what was the motivation behind writing this character, like how does she come about to being, and then the next 50 or 60 pages was the actual play, and the entire play is just one long monologue. Fleabag is about a very lonely woman. She lost her mother, she lost her best friend, she doesn't really talk to her family, and she also has no money and no friends, and so she is very much going through it. But she is also extremely funny and witty, and she has this whole complex life and all these very complex emotions that she has to navigate through. And at the end of the day, like, all she wants is to like not really feel alone. And I love the way that they're able to bring out so many emotions in the audience, because on one hand you're like laughing along at a joke that she's saying, and then the next moment you feel so much despair for her, and like you can relate to her at times, and it's just so amazing how they can like oscillate. So like, you know, like I love when writers can do that, like, yes, bring out every emotion I've ever experienced. But Fleabag definitely had the ability to do that, and I'm very much like intrigued by it because they got so much out in such little space. Like, look at how small this is, but they were still able to define her character so well. The show isn't even that different from this play. Like, yes, the show expands on the characters and the world that they're living in, but Fleabag, the character, the essence of her is still very much the same. I do prefer the show in the sense that so much more just happens and there's so many more characters that you get to know, like the priest. But just as a play on its own, spectacular. I also read In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway, and this is a series of short stories and vignettes written by one of the greatest writers of our time. Hemingway is considered one of the greatest writers and one of the most influential writers of, you know, English prose because of his very clear and concise and simple yet blunt wording. Like, reading Hemingway feels like drinking water in the sense that it's just so easy to do and you just know how to do it, and it's just so clear and it goes down easy. And that's why I like reading his writing, because he's very good at that. The actual stories, this is probably my least favorite out of all the books that I read this month. Also, like, at the very end of this book, for some reason, it just kind of felt like they didn't edit the stories. Like, it's really difficult to come across a Hemingway story that isn't clear and concise, but by the end of it, I just felt like I was just reading a whole lot of mumbo jumbo that was just like put together, and it just felt kind of sluggish. So I wasn't a huge fan towards the end, but the first part of it, I was like, yes, this is very good writing. And it's a series of short stories that are mostly focused about post-war characters who are experiencing PTSD and can't exactly live in the world in the same way again as they once did. So the subject matter is quite heavy just on its own. I think this is something that a lot of people would like. For myself, not the biggest fan. The last book I'd like to talk about that I read this month is Rainer Maria Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. This is a series of 10 letters that an amateur poet had sent to Rainer Maria Rilke. He was more of an accomplished poet at the time. This amateur poet asks Rilke for advice on his poems. He sends him his poems and wants Rilke to send him feedback back. And in turn, Rilke actually gives them a lot of life advice. This book is just filled with life advice. I really like Rilke's writing because he was writing in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and he was very, very open-minded for someone of that time. A lot of his writing was talking about how important solitude is and how you really find yourself in solitude, and it is by understanding yourself and appreciating your own art that you become better at it. He also talks about how, like, you know, women are full human beings and how everyone should focus less on the rules of gender that society pushes upon you, and instead seek to find the masculine and feminine inside all of us, and not just focus on a specific gender or gender roles. And I thought that was very, very interesting, a very interesting perspective for someone of this time period. And he actually has really, really solid advice that helped me through a lot of tough times, and it's still so applicable to our everyday lives. I highly recommend this book. An honorable mention is The Deviltry by Jerzy Kosinski. This is the book that I'm reading right now, and I think I'll be able to finish it by tomorrow, and tomorrow is May 31st, so I wanted to include this anyway. I bought this book because I saw a quote on Tumblr that said something along the lines of, I'm sure, you know what, I don't remember the exact quote, and I don't want to paraphrase it, so let me pull it up right now. The quote was, I'm sure there are aspects of my personality buried within me that will surface as soon as I know I am completely loved. And that quote floored me when I read it for the first time, and I thought about it for such a long time, and I'm like, well, I just have to know where it came from. And it came from this novel called The Deviltry. So far, this is one of the most intriguing things I've read, and that's all I have to say about it. Like, I don't even have any good opinions or bad opinions. I'm just very, very intrigued by it. And it's been compared to The Talented Mr. Ripley and Albert Camus' The Stranger. So far we're following a very morally not so good person. And you know my pattern, you know what I like. It's very easy for books to piss me off, and I don't want to say that I like it too soon just in case it pisses me off, and then this is just like out there in the universe and people are going to think I like this book when I really don't, so I don't have an opinion on it just yet. The last piece of media I read is a screenplay, and it was a screenplay of What's Eating Gilbert Grape. I have not seen the movie, I have not read the book, and I don't know, I started reading screenplays back in high school because I watched Black Swan, which I thought was one of the best movies that's ever been created, and I wanted to know how I can write a screenplay just like it. And so I read that screenplay and I thought it was amazing, and then it was just a thing that I started doing. I just like reading screenplays. And so I came across this one, and I wasn't even like, I don't even know why I read it. I think it was just like there, so I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. It was okay. It's a story about a young man in his mid-20s. He's from a small town, and he's basically responsible for his family, but it's pretty difficult for him to take care of his family for multiple factors. One being that his father committed suicide, and the second being that his mother gained a lot of weight and she was ridiculed by the town for that. She's suffering from a lot of like mental health issues because of the death of her husband and the father of her children. The main character also has a teenage brother who is autistic and needs him to help him get around in the world. And so this man, the main character, Gilbert Grape, he's teetering between sticking by his family and his town and his responsibilities and just leaving everything behind. I wasn't really moved by it necessarily. I didn't really feel like it was telling me anything new. There wasn't any quotes that I liked. It was just meh. It was just meh. I didn't want to end the video off in a meh kind of note. But the good thing is that basically everything else I read this month, which was the 6 or 7 books and the 2 plays, were so great. Great pieces of writing. Anyway, thank you so much for being interested in what I read this month. It was a really good month in terms of reading for me, and I love sharing stuff that I get excited about, like books, and I want to read more, and I'm just regretting all the time I spent last year not reading, but I'm just very happy to get that energy back because I feel like I'm getting back into the flow of what I always really love doing, so that's great. It's getting really late now. Appreciate you being here. I don't know what time you're watching this video, but I'm hoping you're having a good day or a good night or whatever it may be. And I'll see you next time. Bye.